Before I begin, big disclaimer. I am not a professional. I'm not even an amateur. I'm honestly just trying to get more than like 13 views on a video. These are strictly my opinions, nothing more, nothing less. My word is not law. Secondly, spoilers ahead of whatever the heck I'm working on for this video. Nothing I hate more than getting a game spoiled for me, so I'd hate to do it to you. Cheers.
The number of confirmed deaths has passed 200. The governor has called a state of emergency.
There are hundreds and hundreds of bodies lining the streets.
Panic spread worldwide after a leaked report from the World Health Organization showed that the latest vaccination tests have failed.
With the bureaucrats out of power, we can finally take the necessary steps.
Los Angeles is now the latest city to be placed under martial law. All residents are required to report to their designated quarantine. Riots have continued for a third consecutive day, and winter rations are at an all-time low.
A group calling themselves the Fireflies have claimed responsibility for both attacks.
Their public charter calls for the return of all branches of government.
Demonstrations broke out following the execution of 6 more alleged Fireflies.
You can still rise with us. Remember, when you're lost in the darkness, look for the light. Believe in the Fireflies.
Recently, I've been playing The Last of Us Part 1. And no, this isn't a review on Part 1. I can't sit down and review that game for 2 major reasons. Number 1, this game is almost 10 years old, and I don't think there's anything of any significance that I could bring to the table to change anyone's opinion on the game. Secondly, this game, to me, is the greatest game of all time. I'm sorry if you don't think so, but I would have way too much bias and would just talk about how awesome it is the entire time, and nobody wants to hear that. And to me, this game is the closest thing to perfection in a video game, and I don't even think that if I was some sort of professional reviewer, which I'm clearly not, but I don't think I could sit down and find its flaws by any means. I may review Part 2 in the future, because I think that game does have a lot of reviewing potential, whether good or bad reviewers do it, but we'll see. I don't know. I'm actually doing this video because I want to express an idea that I had during my second playthrough of the game back in 2014. I remember already thinking of how I wanted the sequel to look. I remember going through the intro, and we had just seen a small portion of Austin, Texas be completely destroyed within minutes, and an entire apocalypse unfold in front of our eyes. We were just introduced to a nice young girl and what appears to be her very hardworking father. In just the blink of an eye, his life would change. The young girl, who we learned is named Sarah, who is being carried by her father, Joel, out of the city when they are approached by a military member. This guy is ordered to shoot and kill anyone leaving the quarantine area. Sarah is then shot and killed right in front of her father's eyes. This is followed by an opening credit sequence, which I believe is phenomenal, by the way. The audio clips of news broadcasts talk of this virus that's taken over the world and how governments all across the world are taking drastic measures to contain it. Over time, we learn of this small group of individuals who create a resistance known as the Fireflies. This opening is one of the reasons this game is my number 1. The opening is dark and incredibly dramatic. We all know of Sarah's death now in 2022, but in 2013, that blew people away. I can't lie, I went from panic running through the streets immediately to small tears as Joel was rocking back and forth, carrying his deceased child in his arms. After the opening credits, we stare very briefly at a black screen that eventually reads 20 years later. This is the moment that got me thinking. 20 years? That's a long damn time. A number of significant events will happen in anyone's lifetime in 20 years. Not to mention during an apocalypse. We see the events of the game unfold after this 20 years. Joel has become older and very disgruntled, which rightfully so, of course. But I wanted to know what came before. We hear small things throughout the story on what Joel has been doing and where Tommy went, but I wanted the full picture. For example, right before Tess sacrifices herself, she says this to Joel.
Guess what? We're shitty people, Joel. It's been that way for a long time.
No, we are survivors.
This is our chance.
It is over, Tess! Now we try.
This sentence got me thinking. This sentence is what I believe people ignored when they were hating on the fact that Joel died in part 2. As much as I love Joel as a character, he's one of my all-time favorites, Joel is not a good person. The idea that there are individuals out there in this fictional world who would spend years prepping for revenge for someone's actions should not be a shock to anybody, especially when that person is Joel. We love Joel because we see him return to fatherhood throughout the story. We love Joel because we spend time with him as he is developing hope back into his long, disastrous life. Even though it was brief in the beginning, we get to see it come to life throughout the first campaign. But what about before that? What about the actions that led to Joel becoming this broken, aggressive killer? For the sequel, I actually wanted a prequel. I wanted to play as a younger Joel, who had experienced the first few years of this virus and this attack. I wanted to see Joel transform into the old dude passed out on the couch having the bad dreams that we see at the beginning of the first game. I pictured the story starting with Tommy and Joel dressed in the same clothes as that first night in Austin. The clothes are beaten and both men are bloodied and carrying a makeshift small casket. It's just Joel and Tommy. They're walking through this wooded area with nobody else around. It then cuts to Joel and his brother silently digging a hole, and digging, and digging, and digging. They lay down that small wooden crate that reads in small paint, Sarah, on the front. Tommy gives a heartfelt eulogy and holds back tears as he speaks about the short life of his niece. Joel has not spoken, and even refuses to speak now when Tommy addresses him at his own daughter's funeral. This is the beginning of a broken man, who not only has to live in a world that's dying around him, but he has to do it without the person he loves most, his daughter. We skip ahead 1, maybe 2 years. Joel and Tommy are in dark clothing and they have masks on their faces, and they're outside of a camp riddled with soldiers. This is where I pictured the small tutorial to begin. We begin with the new stealth system. Now, when I originally had this idea, I don't really remember if or how exactly I wanted the mechanics to work, but now that we have The Last of Us Part 2, I believe those mechanics are fantastic, so let's just keep those for the sake of this video. Given that Joel is much younger in this time frame, he's in good shape and he has a lot less wounds to slow him down. His movements are much more fluid. We see him trailing behind Tommy, crawling through the bushes and gathering bricks and bottles to utilize as distractions. They sneak past guards and subdue a few along the way until they arrive at a tent. This tent has a large amount of ration credits and blueprints for other camp layouts to be built in the future. After taking the credits and the blueprints, they return back to their homes within the city of Boston. Tommy and Joel are scavengers now, and they're doing small contracts for crooked soldiers and anybody else willing to give them jobs within their compound. As they're collecting their payment, they are approached by a woman, a new character. Picture her however you'd like. She has a symbol on her arm and calls herself a firefly. I know, dramatic entrance, right? Yeah, she's gonna be a badass. Anyway, she offers Joel and Tommy a full-time job. This is where I think Tommy and Joel's relationship can slowly start to separate over the game's timeline. Tommy will start to be sucked in with what the Fireflies are selling by listening to the new character. She will describe the resistance and how they are setting out for the greater good and want to establish a cure. She'll eventually convince Tommy that the current government is killing the world further and the Fireflies are the only light at the end of the tunnel. Joel, on the other hand, is not too sure about the Fireflies and thinks searching for a cure is a useless plan. Tommy, on the other hand, loves what the Fireflies are selling to him and has a more positive outlook on the situation. After some convincing, the Fireflies send them on a mission. a mission to travel to Colorado to establish a camp and meet up with the Fireflies. Joel and Tommy embark on what start out as an easy drive, but are thrown off course due to a large amount of soldiers along their path and have to travel around. Sadly, this is the best way I could think of something that would not have the game set in the same places as the first one. Sorry, I'm not a writer. I'm trying my best here. Bear with me. Along the way, they get to be introduced to some familiar faces. As they are crawling around this massive compound, they have discovered a woman. This woman introduces herself as none other than Tess. Having Tess throughout this campaign could expand on her as a character, and it could also expand on her and Joel's relationship and give her death in the first game much more weight. After running from troops, they are able to hijack a government jeep and get back on the road, but they have to go around. After a long while, they run out of gas and have to walk. They stumble upon a town that has been completely abandoned since the very beginning. It is completely wired off, and the military vehicles surrounding it are just rusted and no longer in use. This town is incredibly quiet and very eerie. They begin to debate if they should enter the town and find gas and food, or if they should simply walk around and hope for the best for another town along the way. After a fair amount of arguing, they decide hopping the fence and traveling through is their best option. While walking, they keep hearing this clicking sound in the alleyways around the buildings. Suddenly, Tommy is attacked. This is where we are first introduced to the clickers. This is the first time that anyone in this group has ever experienced any sort of advanced infected before. After nearly losing their lives in the middle of town, they are temporarily saved by an unknown individual who blows up several clickers with a new device and chops off their head with a machete. He takes them into a room and holds them all at gunpoint. He then makes them empty their bags and keep their hands on their head. We look up and see a younger Bill. Bill has plenty of ammo and a couple of tin cans that reek of gunpowder all wrapped around his belt. Joel and Tommy attempt to convince him to let them go. Joel and Tommy make a deal with Bill that they will help him retrieve the car parts he needs in exchange for helping them escape. It's a rough ride through the town, trying to get away from clickers and other infected, and eventually they get the car parts and Bill lets them go. After the escape, Tommy and Joel's conflict begins to escalate. Tommy begins to state that Joel is clouded by the death of his daughter, and it blocks him from discovering the future for himself within this world. The game would end with Tommy leaving Joel for the Fireflies, and Joel walking the opposite direction with Tess, and the screen would go to black. A time card would read 19 years later. Joel enters an apartment-style living room and sits on a couch. He takes out a picture of Sarah and places it next to the picture of Tommy he has on a table. Joel grabs a beat-up blanket that is easily too short for him, puts it over his legs. He puts his hood on, crosses his arms, still looking at the photos. He takes one deep breath and closes his eyes and falls asleep, and the screen goes to black. This puts us right where we left off in the first game. I've wanted this idea for a prequel for a long time. I would have loved to see how Joel became this ruthless person that he is at the beginning of the first game. Joel seemed like a nice guy until his world collapsed around him, both figuratively and literally. Seeing him evolve into a selfish, paranoid mess gives a little more life to his character. I think seeing flashbacks of him and his daughter throughout the game could also bring a little more life to Sarah's character and make her death even more powerful than it already is. This was a very, very simple layout of how I pictured this prequel-sequel thing working out, but I found the idea interesting. The main grab being we get to play as Joel again and get a better understanding of how the world of The Last of Us was built around him. Giving side characters the opportunity to show more of themselves could give their character more emotion when playing the first game over again. The Last of Us Part 2 has opened a ton of doors for the future of these games, and that could be good or bad, depends on how you see it. I absolutely love the world that Neil Druckmann built with his team at Naughty Dog. Regardless of what the next game is, it will be near impossible to top what they did with the first one. So it's hard to not have higher expectations for this world that Naughty Dog has built. I would love to hear people's ideas for different kinds of sequels, or even make this idea much better and much more drawn out. If you watched my video, share your thoughts. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. Cheers.